My name is Kaylee. Standing in the doorway of my beautiful 3-bedroom home in the historic district, I watched as my parents' car glided up the drive. They were 10 minutes early, just like always. My father stepped out in a navy blazer, my mother in a tailored dress. Their eyes scanned the garden and the brick walkway with a mix of curiosity and calculation. I opened the door before they could knock. For a moment, there was silence. Their eyes darted around the high ceilings, the polished wood floors, and the framed photographs. I saw the confusion in their eyes. How had the girl they'd thrown out become the woman standing before them? Then, my son, Ethan, came down the stairs. He was wearing the navy sweater I'd laid out for him, looking as composed as ever. "Hello," he said, shaking their hands. Then he pulled 2 photos from the sideboard. "That's my dad. He's a neurosurgeon in New York," he said, showing a picture of a tall man in a white coat. "And Mom's the head of operations at Summit Medical Group. She runs the place." My father's jaw tightened. "We thought we were protecting you," he said. "You were just a young girl." I met his gaze. "You never asked if I was safe," I replied. My mother's voice wavered. "I'm sorry. For everything. I forgave you a long time ago," I said evenly. "But that doesn't mean we go back. You can choose to be part of Ethan's life or keep pretending the past didn't happen." They nodded, but I could tell they weren't ready for either choice. I walked them to the door and closed it softly behind them. As I stood there, memories came flooding back. It all started when I was a young woman living with my parents. I was working part-time at a local diner while taking some community college courses. My parents, Henry and Victoria, were strict and traditional. They had big plans for me, like going to a prestigious university and having a high-paying job. One day, as I was making coffee in the kitchen, the mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile floor. My father's voice boomed like thunder. "What have you done, Kaylee?" His words were a demand, not a question. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders stiff under his well-pressed shirt. His eyes narrowed as if he was bracing for the worst. I took a deep breath and straightened my back. One hand rested lightly against the curve that was just starting to show beneath my sweater. "I'm pregnant," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother, who was halfway down the stairs, froze. Her lips pressed into a pale line, and her eyes were cold, showing no concern. She didn't move closer or ask anything. My father's face darkened. "Who is he? Some no good guy you met on the street?" "You've ruined your life," he said. He took a step forward, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I kept my voice steady. "His name doesn't matter. I love my child, and I'm keeping it." He let out a bitter laugh. "We gave you everything. A nice home, the promise of a good future, and you throw it all away for this." I looked him in the eye. "You're just angry you can't control me anymore." That was the last straw. His voice rose, filling the kitchen. "Get out. Pack your things. If you want to be an adult, live like one." I glanced at my mother, hoping she'd say something in my defense. Instead, she slowly shook her head, as if watching someone make an irreversible mistake. They didn't ask if I was safe, if I had a plan, or if I was ready. I walked upstairs, each step firm. My room was just as I'd left it that morning, with posters on the wall and books haphazardly stacked on the desk. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet and stuffed clothes into it without folding them. No one knew that I'd already signed a lease on a small studio apartment on the other side of town. I'd also been working part-time at a small veterinary clinic for months. And no one knew the truth about Ethan's father. He was a young vet student I'd met at the clinic. We'd shared a short but intense relationship, but when I told him I was pregnant, his family pressured him to break things off. They had their own plans for his future, and I wasn't part of them. He offered me money, but I refused. I didn't want Ethan to grow up thinking he was a transaction. When I walked out the front door, the cool air hit my face. I didn't look back. My fingers tightened around the strap of the duffel bag. The weight of it was nothing compared to what I carried inside. The door to my new apartment shut with a hollow thud. The air inside was colder than outside, seeping through a cracked window that whistled whenever the wind shifted. I dropped my duffel bag in the corner and sat on the bare floor, my knees drawn up. My breath was visible in the dim light from the single bulb overhead. I pulled out a can of soup I'd bought earlier and opened it with the small camping opener on my keychain. There was no stove or microwave, just a spoon and my determination to eat something. The metallic taste of the soup was sharp in my mouth, but I ate it all. My phone stayed silent. The last time I'd heard from my parents was in that kitchen. I hadn't expected an apology, but a small part of me had hoped someone would check on me. That part of me was wrong. 2 months before, I'd signed the lease at a shabby-looking rental agency. The manager barely glanced up as I slid the deposit across the desk. I'd smiled then, knowing this place was mine. Around the same time, I'd gotten a job at the veterinary clinic. The hours were long and the pay was modest, but it was steady. Sitting there in the cold apartment, I pressed my hand to my stomach. I felt nothing yet, but I knew everything was different. I wasn't just building a life for myself anymore. I was building one for the child who would never feel unwanted. As the night wore on, the cold got deeper. I lay down on the second-hand mattress I'd picked up that afternoon, wrapping my coat tightly around me. I stared at the cracked ceiling until my eyes grew heavy, holding on to the thought that tomorrow, I'd start. At the clinic, I worked hard. Dr. Olivia Reed, the owner, was kind. She didn't care about my age or my situation. She handed me a stack of intake forms on my first day and said, "You'll figure it out." Coffees in the break room. I scheduled appointments, answered calls, and managed the waiting room. I often stayed a few minutes late to organize the filing cabinet or clean the counters. At night, back in my apartment, I'd open my laptop and study free courses in accounting and business management. I knew I couldn't stay at the front desk forever. As winter came, my days became a blur. I worked at the clinic from dawn to late afternoon and then took the bus to a call center job that lasted deep into the night. The long hours paid for rent, groceries, and prenatal vitamins, but they took a toll on me. At 7 months pregnant, my body was strained. My ankles swelled by noon, my back ached constantly, and my stomach felt like it was pulling on every muscle. One night, as I waited at the bus stop after my shift, the cold wind was sharper than usual. My legs trembled, and my hands shook as I fumbled with my coat buttons. A wave of dizziness hit me, and before I could steady myself, I ended up on the icy bench. I clutched my stomach and forced my breathing to slow. A familiar voice broke through the fog. "Kaylee." I looked up to see Dr. Olivia standing a few feet away, her coat half-buttoned, her brow furrowed. Without a word, she helped me to my feet, guided me into her car, and drove me back to the clinic. The waiting room was dark, but she unlocked the door, switched on a lamp, and led me to a chair. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." She didn't press. Instead, she walked into her office and returned with a sealed envelope. "Give this to my sister," she said. "Her name's Sophia Reed. She runs the finance office at a big pet care chain." I stared at the envelope, confused. "Why?" Her eyes softened. "Because you remind me of someone I lost once, and I don't make that mistake twice." I couldn't speak for a long time. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, full of possibilities. I slipped it into my bag, my fingers curling around it as if it might disappear. I didn't know if it was a lifeline or a test, but I knew I couldn't leave it unopened forever. 2 months later, Ethan was born. He was smaller than I'd imagined, with tiny fists curled tight and eyes that opened slowly, looking for a face he didn't yet know but already trusted. I traced a finger over his cheek and felt a love so intense it almost hurt. In that moment, I promised him that he'd never wonder if he was wanted, and he'd never doubt his place in my life. A few days after we came home from the hospital, Sophia called. Her voice was brisk but not unkind. My sister says you're reliable. I need someone to handle data entry and financial reporting. It's remote, flexible hours, and you'll get paid per project. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was an opportunity. I said yes before she finished explaining the pay. My days became a cycle of feeding Ethan, rocking him to sleep, typing reports at the kitchen table, and then picking him up again when he stirred. The click of the keyboard mixed with his soft breathing became the soundtrack of my life. There were times when exhaustion pulled at me like a strong tide. I'd stare at the clock at 3 a.m. And wonder how much longer I could keep going. But then Ethan would make a small sound in his sleep, and his tiny hand would reach out as if to make sure I was still there. And I'd remember why I couldn't stop. Each report I sent to Sophia was clean, on time, and double-checked. I didn't ask for praise, I asked for more work. Slowly, the projects came more often, and I started to feel like I was building something more than just survival. 2 years later, my days had a rhythm. Mornings with Ethan over cereal and fruit, afternoons balancing spreadsheets and reports, and nights taking online courses while he slept. I was moving forward, step by step. Then, an email came from the pet care chain. It was about a budget review and staffing changes. There would be cuts across departments, and remote contractors were among the first to be reviewed. The timing couldn't have been worse. I'd just enrolled in an advanced accounting course, using my savings to pay the tuition. Losing this job would mean starting over again, and I didn't have the luxury of time. The pressure got worse when I overheard a senior colleague, Lily, on a call. She's talented, but she's a single mom working from home. We need people who can fully commit. Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. If they thought my life was a limitation, I'd prove them wrong. When an important corporate account started showing inconsistencies, I volunteered to review it, even though it wasn't my assignment. I worked after hours for 3 straight weeks, unpaid, going through thousands of line items while Ethan sat beside me with coloring books. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the discrepancies were big enough to jeopardize the entire contract. I organized my findings into a detailed report with solutions and sent it directly to Sophia. She called me the next morning. You just saved us an 8-figure account, she said. There was a pause, then she added softly, don't worry about your position, Kaylee. You've earned your place here. From that day on, things changed. Sophia started including me in higher-level communications and asked for my input on processes beyond my role. She trusted me, and I finally felt like I was climbing the ladder, not just hanging on. We moved into a townhouse. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. There was a small front yard for Ethan to play in, clean hardwood floors inside, and a door that no one could kick me out of. I unpacked a framed photo of Ethan's first birthday, with cake smeared across his cheeks and a wide, unguarded smile. I set it on a small table by the entryway so it would be the first thing we saw when we came home. My wardrobe slowly changed. I found fitted blazers, simple blouses, and low-heeled shoes at thrift stores. When I walked into the grocery store or the bank, I noticed the way people addressed me had changed. I was no longer seen as a young girl trying to figure things out, but as a woman with a purpose. My parents remained silent. I still heard about them through family friends. My father had joined the board of a local animal charity, and my mother hosted fancy dinner parties. They smiled in photos, looking proud of their perfect family. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with that birthday photo in my hands. For a moment, I considered sending it to my parents, letting them see the face of the grandson they'd never met. I imagined their curiosity or maybe even regret, but the thought quickly turned sour. They hadn't earned that part of Ethan's life, Our story belonged to us, and I'd decide when and if to share it. I placed the frame back on the table by the door and turned off the light. Then, that cream-colored envelope arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. I stood in the kitchen for a long time before opening it. "Kaylee, your cousin told us you live nearby. We didn't know how to reach you. We'd like to see you and meet your son. Please, if you're willing to talk." There was no mention of the years in between, no apology for the day they'd told me to leave. It was as if the past had been a misunderstanding. I read the letter 3 more times, trying to guess their motives. Was it regret, guilt, or just curiosity now that Ethan was 13? I set the letter down, my hand steady. I could have thrown it away or written back to say nothing had changed. Instead, I decided to invite them. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, my voice polite but distant. "Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll send the address." As I hung up, I looked at the framed photo of Ethan on the mantel. He was smiling, a boy who'd grown up knowing unconditional love. They had no idea what they were walking into.